Christ and Culture. It's not just the name of a book by H. Richard Niebuhr. It describes a tension Christians have sensed from the very earliest days of the church. That tension is the question of how to navigate the often competing loyalties of living as Christian disciples in a broader culture. As Niebuhr so helpfully points out, there have been several distinctive ways that different Christians and Christian groups have navigated this tension. But what I want to do today, before we move on to talk about the particulars, is to say something about why Niebuhr wrote this book, what his underlying purpose is, and how that can help us understand why this book has remained in print for nearly 75 years. More than that, knowing his purpose might even help us navigate today's contentious and chaotic social and political landscape, where people often cannot even agree on facts. Niebuhr can't help us solve our current situation, but his words can help us think more clearly about where we are today. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Saturday, June 8th, 2024. The post-World War II years in America were optimistic years in many ways. America had successfully turned back the tide of fascism. The Great Depression, which had lingered right up to the war years, was over. Americans had a great sense of confidence and hope that their world was only improving. During the same years, there were two undercurrents affecting the churches in America. On the one hand, there was a great ecumenical movement in which churches from widely divergent traditions were engaged in conversations to discover ways to work together in ministry, and perhaps even to heal long divisions. On the other hand, there was an increasingly contentious fight between fundamentalists and modernists, their own words, not mine. Our own Presbyterian church saw dramatic fights that tore the church apart over issues related to biblical interpretation and authority. Against this backdrop, H. Richard Niebuhr, then in the zenith of his career, was invited to deliver a series of lectures at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. In the winter of 1949, he delivered those lectures, which 2 years later, in 1951, appeared as the book Christ and Culture. Now, H. Richard Niebuhr was the less famous of two theological brothers. His older brother, Reinhold Niebuhr, was known to nearly all Americans as the voice of the ecumenical and modernist wing of the church in America, having even appeared on the cover of Time magazine in March of 1948. So when H. Richard Niebuhr produced these lectures and this book, he was writing at a time when tensions between different wings of the church in America were flying apart, even as the ecumenical movement was trying to hold them together. Read against this backdrop, it becomes clear what Niebuhr was after. In his own words, it is the purpose of the following chapters to set forth typical Christian answers to the problem of Christ and culture, and so to contribute to the mutual understanding of variant and often conflicting Christian groups. The belief which lies back of this effort, however, is the conviction that Christ as living Lord is answering the question in the totality of history and life in a fashion which transcends the wisdom of all his interpreters, yet employs their partial insights and their necessary conflicts. In other words, for Niebuhr, no single part of the church can ever lay claim to a perfect understanding of Christ and what Christ calls the church to be and to do in every age. It is only the whole church, with all its conflicts and diversity, that expresses a relatively complete picture of Christian life. Christian groups may differ, but they are still, together, emphatically, the church. As you can probably tell, this is a call for the broadest possible ecumenism, the broadest possible understanding of the church. It transcends every tradition, even though each person must, as Niebuhr did, stand firmly within a particular tradition. His call, in short, was for mutual understanding at a time when circumstances were tearing the church apart. Which brings me back to our own day and time. If anything, the situation has only intensified. Evangelical Christianity and the old mainline Christianity are barely on speaking terms. To add to the seriousness of things, political and social forces seem to be tearing at the fabric of American life. Can we learn to appreciate one another? Perhaps. My hope is that by the time we've walked through this little book, we can see a way forward through these fractious times. Next week, I'll walk us through Niebuhr's methodology. He analyzes the different strains of Christianity through the lens of several different theological polarities and issues. It is important to understand these polarities if we want to understand the different theological traditions and how they uphold a part of what it means to honor Christ. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.